Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Jeanne Harrison, author of the newly released book, Hiding in the Hallway, Anchoring Yourself as an MK. We're going to talk to Jeanne and find out what an MK is. Jeanne Harrison, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Jeanne grew up as a missionary kid, that's an MK, in the Philippines. A frequent blogger and author, Jeanne's passionate about sharing her experiences with potential world changers. She lives with her husband Clint and their 4 daughters in Macon, Georgia, where Clint serves as an executive pastor at a local church. You are the first MK we've had on the program. This is kind of a new concept. We have lots of PKs. We have lots of RKs.
I don't know if I know what that is.
A rabbi's kid.
Oh, yeah, I should have figured that out. Okay.
Yeah, see, my daughter is a RK. So
Okay, yes.
So there's PKs, RKs, and now MKs. And so that's exciting. Go all the way back. You were kind of born into this.
Yeah, my mom and dad met as single missionaries. My mom's actually from Singapore. My dad's from the U.S. They both decided to become missionaries. They met overseas at a conference, got married, and then they served in India and Sri Lanka as missionaries. It was called Campus Crusade for Christ.
Sure, now it's Cru.
Right, now it's Cru. Served with those countries, and then when they started having kids, they stayed in the Philippines. And I was born and raised in the Philippines till I was 15.
So you were bilingual?
Actually, no.
No.
That's kind of a common misconception, I think. Some MKs are, but where I grew up in the Philippines, people spoke a lot of English, and my dad spoke some Tagalog, but he worked with doctors. His whole ministry, he's not a doctor, but his whole ministry was with medical professionals. So in the Philippines, those people spoke English.
Okay. So your normal and other kids' normal were different.
Yes.
What was normal for you? What was it like, really, as a missionary's kid? Did they teach you the purpose of it? Did they explain it to you as you were growing up? Did you have clarity and vision as to what it was that you were being raised in?
I think yes and no. As a kid, it was just what I knew. I remember the first time my dad said he took me to the U.S. to be with relatives and all that. I asked him, well, where are all the street children? Like, how come there's nobody here who's naked or begging for food at our car? And he told me, well, they don't have that here. They don't have that in America. And to me, that my normal was very different than what, like, my dad growing up, his normal would have been. But I guess it's different for all missionary kids. Some MKs are raised in Europe, some are raised in small third world countries, and of course that's going to impact it. But I guess where I grew up, like the street I grew up on, in the Philippines, the rich and the poor lived side by side. So there was a senator right next door to me with this gorgeous swimming pool, and then across the street there were homeless people who just built, like, out of tins and stuff, shanties kind of. And that was very common there. All of that was completely normal to me growing up. We also came to the States about every 3 years and to Singapore to see my parents' families and to raise support. So all of that, like, seeing grandma and grandpa, but not really being close to them because they live so far away, all of that was just part of my normal growing up.
So when normal missionaries have people in their home quite a bit.
Right.
The home becomes the mission center where people are ministered to, whether or not it's through food, clothing, shelter, and the gospel. It's always something and the gospel. So as you were being raised up, did you have a bold faith? Did you have questions yourself, or were you just so immersed in it that the thought process wasn't even there to think outside of what you were experiencing?
I definitely had a strong faith, I think, growing up. My mom and dad taught me. I had a lot of questions about it. I saw them doing it. Um, Growing up, my dad, part of being the medical ministry director, one of the things he did was he oversaw, like, we called it agape rural programs. So he would take a team of doctors out into the middle of nowhere, and they would teach them, like, basic sanitation and then the gospel, like you said. So, clean hands, clean heart. They would do things like that to teach them. And seeing just snippets of that as a kid, I think that it built compassion in me. It built a lot of interest in who Jesus is. But my parents were very grounded at home. They taught me. My faith was not really challenged until I left the Philippines. And then going at 15 back to the US was devastating to me. That's when I realized I had to really claim my faith as my own, or I would just come undone.
So what were some of the challenges for you? First of all, what denomination were you connected with?
My parents, we went to an E-free church, evangelical free church, but they somewhat non-denominational. Cru has all missionaries from different denominations. So, but I think the biggest challenge going back to the States was just I looked like I should know what was going on and kind of like I fit in, but the culture was different to me. I didn't know pop cultural things. I felt lost all the time. There was a sense of being an outsider, that I went from this little school of like 600 missionary kids to this school of 2,000 American public high school students. So it was a big change for me.
So this is really where the journey of hiding in the hallway, this was really the journey where you were on the outside looking in.
Yes.
What was your framework for this? Because there are people of faith around you. You moved into a city. What city did you move to?
To Gainesville, Florida.
Okay, to Gainesville, Florida. So there were churches, there were youth groups, teen groups, there were things to get involved in, but your perspective on what they were doing was different than what you had done. So how did those two approaches, those two experiences, how did they collide? Because it was really a collision, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think that, I went to church, of course. My parents, when we came back to the States, they put me in church. I went to youth groups, but I never really fit in with my peers because I think I had this whole life and world of experiences that they couldn't really connect to, and I couldn't connect to their life and world and experiences. And when I wrote this book, I did a lot of research, and I can't even remember where I read this, but one author talks about being a missionary kid, and they said that, whenever he was kind of like a social scientist. He said, whenever you meet people, you immediately look at them and you categorize them as an us or a them. So if your neighbor moves in and he's like talking about the Georgia Bulldogs and he's grilling hot dogs, you say, well, that's an us, he's like me. But if your neighbor moves in and she's Japanese wearing a kimono and she bows, then you say, well, she's a them. And it's not bad. It helps you be sensitive to them, and you don't expect them to know certain things. And, but they said the thing with being a missionary kid, or even like a military kid, any kind of third culture kid who's raised in a foreign culture, is people look at you and they assume you're an us, but really you're a them. Like, you could be a Caucasian boy in the US, but you grew up in Japan your whole life. And so you have all different, you don't understand certain things, you have different values, you have a different way of communicating. Maybe you like to go through conversation in a more reserved way and Americans don't. There's so many things that people miss, and I think you end up being misunderstood and kind of feeling like you're always on the outside looking in. That was part of this concept of hiding in the hallway, being on the outside, observing, but not really part of it, not really belonging. And it's amazing. I think MKs carry that through their whole life, even into adulthood.
So what would appear to be you fit in, you didn't feel like you fit in. You didn't really understand the cultural aspects of life in Northwest Florida. This was something that was foreign to you. So even though you were aware of it, you hadn't experienced it. Was there a welcoming of you? Were people trying to reach out and find out, or is this the classic situation where 70% of all high school and college students struggle with loneliness, with feeling like they're not a part of what's really going on, and they wear a mask, and they're fearful that someone will see behind the mask as to who they really are and what the struggle is. So in your case, there was a real reason. It wasn't psychological, it wasn't depression, it wasn't an identity crisis, it was a real reason. You had grown up in a different culture, different environment, a different sense of community thrown into a mix. Were your parents sensitive, or did they know what this was about?
Yes, they were sensitive to it. I think that I feel like I hit a breakthrough with my mom the day that she sat down and just listened to me and let me basically cry about all of it. I think, and I'm a mom of 4 little girls. I think that as a parent, it's tempting when your kid is hurting to just want to say, it's going to be good, stiff upper lip, let's go, it's not so bad, because you feel like if you empathize, they're just going to come undone. But I feel like as an MK, the day my mom really empathized and listened was the day I began to let it go, because I think I just wanted to know, your decision to be a missionary, it cost me something, and I need to know that you see that. I need to know that you understand that you and my dad, what you chose to do with your life, has these big implications for me. And I think it's so interesting you said that statistic about 70%, because probably all my American peers were also struggling with identity and all this. I think teenage years, you're so egocentric that as an MK, it comes to a boiling point because it's just magnified. On top of all this insecurity, now you have culture shock and you have all this other baggage kind of. And like Kay's or Rabbi's kids, there's expectations. Even when you're in church and whatever, people expect that, oh, you were raised overseas, you must know Jesus, you must know everything about the Bible. So there's a lot of just pressure in general.
Gina, how many missionary kids are there? How many? I don't think we really have a grasp of how large a community this really is.
I think it's huge. I think about like crew. I remember going to staff conference, and I could be completely wrong, but I feel like there was around 5,000 staff families. And that's one organization. The International Mission Board would be one of the biggest. When I promoted this book, I went to every single missions organization I could find to promote it with their member care people, and there's just like probably a dozen or more in evangelical circles of missions organizations. So you add up, all those families have children. I mean, thousands. I don't know exactly, but I would say thousands.
Well, there have to be hundreds of thousands, even into the million, when you take a look at every denomination that has any kind of international outreach. And then you have the other side of the equation. You have missionary kids here because America is a ripe mission field. Korean missions come to America.
Yeah.
Canadian missions come to America. There are other countries sending missionaries to America because they think we're not doing it well anymore. We've lost some of our luster as far as being a Judeo-Christian nation, and they see from an observation standpoint. I mean, we are the #1 nation for Korean missions to America. When they look around the world, they say America needs us more than, and we're sending people out thinking we've got all the answers when we really have some serious issues of our own.
I think too, with you saying that, when you said, when I came to the States, didn't I go to church and have youth group and all? And I did, but I think that one thing I'd never seen overseas was this lukewarm Christianity. That in the States, I remember going to class and thinking, oh, this person said that I saw them in the youth group band, they're singing, and then in class they were like not at all acting like a believer in any way, and it kind of blew my mind. Where I grew up, it was clear, you said it and you did it, or you kind of rejected it. And maybe there was some overlap, but in the U.S., I do see that was another thing. I didn't really know how to understand that either.
Well, I've lived here all my life and I don't understand it.
Right.
When I came to faith at age 44 as a Jewish man in a Jewish world that I lived in, and I saw what I saw in the church, I was puzzled and saying, My goodness, if this is the end all and be all to all things, is to have put your trust and faith in Jesus and have a personal relationship, why aren't you jumping for joy? Why aren't you doing backflips? Why aren't you rejoicing every single day of your life that you don't have to deal with that anymore, that horror of pleasing the world? And if you're pleasing God, if God is for you, who can be against you? My goodness, it was the most freeing thing that ever happened to me. And why aren't people still enthusiastic the way I am 20, 25 years later, when I'm still trying to do more excited, more on fire than I've ever been before? Is it not supposed to grow? Why does it taper off? And I'm sure that this was radical for you, because we find that in Near East, Far East cultures, and under that cultural influence, that we find that there is a level of commitment to prayer like nothing else in the world. I used to do prayer and healing services, and they would last 8 and 10 hours, and people would say, how could you pray for 8 to 10 hours? And I go, listen, in Korea, in China, 3 days is a good start.
Right.
In America, 3 minutes is a good start.
Right.
So I'm sure that this was not just cultural, but this was a radically different faith enterprise, faith experience. The messages. How did you respond to the pulpit? And in hearing the depth of what was being preached, it had to be radically different, because I know some of these Filipino pastors are so excited, so exuberant, and as far as notes are concerned, or PowerPoint presentations, it's like, what are you talking about? Notes? What do I need notes for? Outlines. Outline? What are you talking about an outline? I get up there and I, led by the Holy Spirit, I preach. I don't stand still. I move, I shake, I shout, I stomp, I walk, I preach. I have my Bible. Notes? What is this notes that you use thing? It's just so different. Spontaneous prayer, spontaneous preaching, spontaneous outbreaks of song. Not here in the United States. So you came 15 years with this experience. It had to be a shock to you.
And it is different. And I will say this. There were parts about the way American, and I use that, every church is different, and I don't want to stereotype all American churches, but there were things I did like about it, I will say, because I feel like sometimes, like what you said, I've been and heard people in Africa preach, and it's just like, buckle your seatbelt, you're going to be there all week, and there's something so cool about that. But I also think there's something kind of beautiful about, people who do it in a more structured way, and you sit down and you listen, and they have clear points and a clear outline. And as someone who likes to take notes and learn, I see beauty in that too, but it is different. And I think maybe what you're kind of saying too is the sad part is if it lacks passion. Whereas overseas, sometimes there's this fervor and excitement, and they're willing to sit for a long time in the Word. But as a kid, I certainly did get antsy 1 or 2 times in some of those, kind of church services.
So what was it that helped you recognize what you were feeling, what you were seeing, and come to the realization that maybe you're not the only one?
Are you talking about by the time I wanted to write this book, or just as a kid, as a teenager? As a teenager,
that you began to, you certainly didn't head down a path of destruction. You actually embraced the Romans 8:28 attitude that all things work together for good, and you had to figure out how to navigate all this.
I have a defining moment when I remember I didn't rebel in the traditional sense. I didn't dive off the deep end. And I think it's because I had a very close relationship with my mom and dad. I remember talking to my mom for the first time, like, Mom, is it really that bad to just try drugs like one time? If kids all talk about it in school, what do you think? And thank God my mom didn't panic. She wasn't like, she just said, well, let's talk about that. And we talked it through, and she showed me how to be foolish. So I think that protected me. But I did inwardly feel very rebellious towards God. And I felt very angry. I felt angry I didn't have friends. I felt angry that while I was so miserable, all my friends back in the Philippines had community and I was missing out. And the reason we came to the States is because my older sister was going to college. So I was 15, but it was time for her to go to university. And I remember one year we had a staff conference at Crew, and it was the year that Bill Bright died. And he was the president and founder of Crew. And I sat through, it was like a memorial service to him with this stadium, 5,000 or however many people. And I saw his whole life. And it was so powerful to me how he gave his whole life to Jesus and the gospel. And I remember leaving that stadium, and I went to this spot in the grass, and I just got on my knees and I wept. And I realized that all this time I was processing and so mad that I was leaving the Philippines. It's all about me and all that I had to give up for the gospel and for my parents' job and all this stuff. And I thought, man, all these other teenagers around me have broken homes. They have broken hearts. They're headed to hell, so many of them. And it's like I had missed all these opportunities. And I remember repenting and believing that God had a bigger purpose. And for me, that was a big defining moment when I said, even though I want to rebel in my heart, I'm going to repent instead.
Well, that's very, very exciting. Take us to the point where you're in high school and do things get better? I mean, you're 15. What grade were you in at that time?
I came back in my sophomore year.
Okay, so then you have your junior year, your senior year. What changed for you?
You know, actually, I joined a club called International Club, and it was the one place I finally kind of found my niche. It was with kids, and you know, that's the funny thing too about MKs. It's like we could fit in. It doesn't have to be just Filipinos. It's like anyone with another culture feels like a friend. You know, I saw this one girl in class, and I remember she looked at me and she smiled really warmly, and I knew immediately she's not American. And nothing bad about I married an American. I love Americans, but I had learned that culturally, where Filipinos smile at strangers, Americans, especially American boys, get the wrong idea if you just smile for no reason at them. So I had learned not to do that. But this girl smiled so engagingly, and sure enough, she was from Argentina, and she was just very outgoing and friendly, and we struck up a friendship, and she introduced me to International Club, and I met all these people, and it was like they were my people, even though they were from all over the world. None of them were from the Philippines. Well, one was from the Philippines, but for me, that was a turning point too, that club.
So I think that's an important lesson for everybody, is that there's somebody for everybody. You just have to find out what clicks, what meshes, to find where community can be established, because we all seek a sense of community. We all want to belong. It seems spiritually enough to say, as long as you have a relationship with God and you're part of God's economy and God's community, that everything's going to be just fine. But still, life still happens in those hours where we have to go through school, we have to go through work, we have to go through relationships, we have to find our way and our identity, and you found your way and identity this way in school. We're talking with Jeanne Harrison, author of Hiding in the Hallway, Anchoring Yourself as an MK, as a missionary kid. It's quite a journey we don't hear a lot about in regards to missionary kids, but a journey we all go through in trying to find our place in this world. Where do we fit? Are we hiding in the hallway, or are we seeking out like-minded people? Are we repelled by the standards of this world that make us feel like we're a stranger in a strange place? But God has a plan for all of us, and He will open up doors, bring people into your life, and help you find your way when no way seems possible. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Jeanne about more on her story about navigating this struggle, her victory, and how you too can benefit from hearing about hiding in the hallway. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. We're talking with Jeanne Harrison, author of Hiding in the Hallway, Anchoring Yourself as an MK. Jeanne, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Jeanne, some of the struggles that you have defined are pretty common, whether you're a missionary kid or not, but your perspective is kind of on point to really showing how these struggles come about for people who are from the outside coming in. And even those people on the inside are sometimes on the outside looking in. And you identify in your book 4 common MK struggles. The first one, feeling rootless. Help me understand that.
There's a woman named Ruth Useem who coined the term third culture kid. And she basically says a third culture kid is anyone like a military kid or MK who is raised in a foreign culture. So if you imagine your parents or your passport culture is the United States,
yes,
and then you're raised in Australia as a host culture, the third culture is actually a blend of Australia and the U.S. So you're never going to fully belong in Australia, you're never going to fully belong in the U.S., and that little culture only exists to you and your family and maybe the other small group of people who are expats in Australia. So if there's a sense in which you have no home, you have no roots. When I got married, I remember going to my husband's hometown and I met all his friends and this is the school he grew up in, all that, and I couldn't show him any hometown or place like that. When we got married, I said, you pick the church because there is no home base for me sentimentally, That's, I think, rootless.
Does that give you any challenges in putting down roots, or is it just the complete opposite? You have this deep desire to put down roots and deep roots and to be firmly grounded in a particular place with hopes that you'll never move, you'll never change, and that you want that stability to be your anchor.
For me, it's the latter. I know some MKs who it's the former, like they get antsy every 6 months, they want to go. I wish I could put down roots that the apocalypse couldn't shake, we're here, we're not ever going, because it was so hard for me.
Okay. Sacrificing physical comforts. I mean, third world countries certainly have their challenges from a physical comfort standpoint, but you were in the Philippines, which is in a major capital city, Manila, that had many of the creature comforts of modern society. What did you do without?
Well, growing up, we had no central air conditioning in a very, very hot tropical country. So we had a little box unit in my parents' room, and once a week we would turn it on and all sleep in that room. And we didn't have a shower head, like we had a bucket and a scooper, things like that. We had very few TV channels. Now today, I don't know, I'm 32, so maybe people have more, I don't know. But I think depending on where you live, sacrificing physical comforts is a lot more extreme for some MKs than others. I know MKs who have absolutely no internet. They live like very primitive lifestyles. So there's all broad spectrum.
And then you have living in a fishbowl, which is something that every PK, RK, MK finds themselves in, but being a child in that, it's certainly a decision I made when I went in the ministry. I knew that, but
right.
you didn't choose this life. You were born into it. How did that impact you?
I think I had to come to terms with realizing that when God chooses something for your mom and dad, then it's the very center of his will for you also, Otherwise, I would have been very resentful. I remember hearing John Piper's son, Barnabas, talk about what it's like to be a PK, and he told this story that was so good. He said when he was little, he liked to collect rocks, so whenever he would go to school, they had this pretty paved sidewalk, and he would just take 1 or 2 rocks. And he said one day an administrator told him, hey, you can't do that. And he said, but it's just 1 rock. And he said, but if every kid took 1 rock, there'd be nothing but dirt left. And Barnabas Piper said that's the experience of a PK or a ministry kid, MK. He said, or an RK, that it's like people make these small comments because they have these expectations, like, oh, the pastor's kid is wearing what? Like, they arrived how late to church, or they're behaving like this. And he said it seems so small, but everybody's taking 1 rock from the sidewalk, and it adds up to a lot of pressure. And that's what I think of when I think of this fishbowl syndrome.
Interesting. You go on to talk about the fourth one, leaving loved ones, which you found to be the most painful.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is the hardest for most. And I didn't even move that much, but some move a lot more. Um, Really, honestly, when I wrote this book, though, the beautiful thing that I began to learn is the gospel speaks to every single one of those things. When you think about sacrificing physical comforts, uh, I realized one day, there's nothing Jesus has ever asked me to sacrifice that will outweigh what he sacrificed. There's a sense in which Jesus was the most rootless person ever, his father had a mission. He was uprooted from a place he certainly belonged in heaven. He came to earth, to a foreign place where he would never be fully accepted. And you think about, as you begin to think that way, you realize, man, it's kind of a privilege to be a missionary kid and to walk in those kind of footsteps. And same with leaving loved ones. Jesus certainly knows what it's like to say farewell.
Well, you're exactly right. In the book, you talk about dealing with the dark side of ministry. I don't know that many of the boldness and the honesty to bring up the fact that there are dark sides to ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And you tell us about that chapter.
Yeah.
Parents, children,
Mm-hmm.
all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. None are righteous, no, not one. On and on and on. But that's theoretical.
Right.
That's in theory, because in the glass house, you're not allowed to be an ordinary sinner. You're not allowed to be a regular person. There
Right.
is a dark side, and we do mess up.
Yes. I think as a kid, the two ways I felt the dark side of ministry was one, when my parents were, like you said, sinners and human. And, as a parent, and my husband's a pastor, but as a parent, you go home and you process and you talk and you sometimes say more than you should have said. And as a kid, just on the outskirts of these conversations, you begin to feel jaded about certain leaders, or if you know that there's criticism. I remember the first time I ever heard that, my goodness, people are critical of my father, it's like, you feel embarrassed, but you also feel insecure, and like the world is kind of shaken for you. That's one side of it, like seeing and seeing your parents maybe vent more than they should, overhearing gossip that you shouldn't hear. I think that's it. And then the other side is when people mistreat your parents. So it's when your parents sin, and then when people sin against your parents. Those two things are very affecting, and it can make you think ministry is just horrible, the worst thing in the world. And I think that's why a lot of missionary kids and pastors' kids reject the faith. And I feel like when I sat down and had the thought behind this book, a lot of it was because now that I'm an adult, on Facebook, I'm friends with all my old MK friends, and I get to see the latter chapters of their stories, and I feel like, whoa, so many of them would not identify as believers at all, have completely walked away from the faith. And I think some of this contributes, but what I think we can do to combat it is we teach ministry in the framework of the gospel. Like you just said, we are broken, we're sinners, doing ministry with other sinful people under the leadership of sinful people to reach sinful people, and thank God for Jesus and his grace. And I think as parents, me being a parent who said more than I should have in front of my kids, you always have the chance to go back and say, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said that about that man, we need to respect him. Jesus, mom needs Jesus too, and it's about shepherding them through all of the dark side of ministry that we don't talk about.
Melissa, you were a young, attractive girl. Obviously, boys came into the picture, and you had to begin to navigate the whole concept of dating and interpersonal relations. How well did you do in the beginning?
Well, I have always been notoriously shy, so I think I didn't date a whole lot, to be honest, and I'm thankful for that. But I think that I do talk about dating in my book, because I think there's some common ways MKs struggle with dating. Do you want me to talk about those instead of myself?
Well, I think they're one and the same, aren't they?
Well, yeah, I didn't necessarily fall prey to all of these pitfalls, but things I've seen in my friends and all that. One would be, I think that missionary kids tend to go really deep fast. Like we tend to build very intimate relationships with our conversation, and all these social scientists have different theories on why. One is because we move a lot, so we feel like we have to do it quick. Another is because there's less of a threat to share yourself when you're going to leave anyway. There's a lot of different theories, but I think this can be very dangerous for missionary kids. We can tend to have unguarded relationships. We can be misunderstood and get too emotionally close to a guy or girl. I think that there's also, I talk about in my book, this concept of Temptation Island. Do you remember that show, Temptation Island? It was years ago that I didn't watch it, but it was this whole concept of testing couples, and they set up an island that was like filled with bikini-clad women and scantily-clad men, and couples would go there and be tested in their relationship. And I said that in the book, I felt like sometimes your passport country can feel like Temptation Island. Like you grow up in a country where maybe you don't have much internet access, you don't see people dressed immodestly, and then you come back to a home country or passport country where, boy, it is mind-blowing. The things that I learned the first week of school was shocking to me, being from such a sheltered background. And that is very easy to slip up and stumble right away, because suddenly you're on Temptation Island with all this access to everything. That's another pitfall, I think, in dating as MKs. I think that online stuff, too, escaping online. When we were talking earlier about friendship, I was thinking the one thing I don't know about is what it's like today with the internet as an MK. Because growing up, I didn't have that. And I can imagine, I love that you said we need community, we need to find our people. But I can imagine that if I had the internet, I might have been tempted just to live virtually with all my old friends, because now I could have spent all my time on Instagram or social media or whatever, rather than forge new friendships. And I think when it comes to dating and the internet can be very dangerous, and I could see it being even more dangerous for missionary kids who are it's like the ultimate hallway. You hide in it and you're on the outside looking in, and nobody sees what you're up to.
Well, that's exactly what happens even in today's environment. Texting and text dating has replaced the old courtship, or the old time of you were thrown together, you had to have a conversation. You had to pick up the phone, which was the scariest thing ever, was to pick up the telephone. Now you can text somebody and say, you want to go out? And they go, no, I got plans. You go, okay, catch you later. And there's no personal, there's no hurt feelings, there's no emotion, there's nothing. It was just, it took a second. But to dial the number and to wait and to hear it ring. And so if it's a father that answers, what do I do? If the mother answers, what do I do? Oh my goodness, what if she answers? And you would be so scared, you'd hang up the phone.
Right.
They answered. And there wasn't caller ID. There wasn't a way on a rotary phone for you to actually know who called you. So it was safe. Today, you call me even by accident, your name comes up on my screen.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
I remember pulling that rotary phone under my door and shutting it just to try to have some privacy in my house if a boy was calling. I remember. It's crazy. It
is. I mean, then the princess telephone came, and my sisters had one of those very, very long cords, and they would do that. They would go into the closet, and you would see the cord coming out from the wall into the closet, and and you had no idea what they were doing. So this whole online situation. Now, you did not live under a rock. So let's not portray you as somebody that came out of the medieval times. That the way you met people was on horseback, and the way that you got mail was delivered, by a carrier pigeon. You came to the States at 15 years old. You were indoctrinated, and by the time you graduated high school, you certainly got the lay of the land. You certainly knew what was going on, and you had assimilated, but at what cost? Was there a cost involved?
Honestly, like I said, I did not have a shockingly rebellious season, and I do remember as a teenager praying and saying, kind of a preteen, telling God, I know as far as boys and all this, I've heard all the horror stories. I know I'm going to be tempted in this area. And I asked him, would you please just protect me? Like if I start to go down that path, and boy, when I got to the States, there were several times I wanted so badly, more than anything, to date a non-believer because there was just not many Christian guys at my school, and I was so lonely, and I missed my old friends, and I wanted it so much. But a long time ago, I had prayed and said, God, will you just pull me back if I start to go down that path? And I really think God, in His kindness, honored that. I remember talking to my dad one time about this boy, and I said, Dad, I just want to date him so badly. You don't get it. There's just no Christian guys at my school, no cool ones anyway, you know. And my dad said, okay, imagine if you started dating him, what would it be like tomorrow? And I said, oh, Dad, it'd be awesome. I'd have a date to prom. I could go to the movies with someone. And he said, okay, what about in a year? And I thought, well, I'll be going to college. I doubt he would be faithful to me because this boy flirted with everybody. But I was like, He said, what about 5 years if you were still with him? What about 10 years? And I started thinking, man, if we were married and had kids, I know he wouldn't go to church because he has no desire to do that. I don't know that he would stick with me by that, you know. And I just realized I don't think I do want to date him. But that was always an internal struggle for me because the pickings were so slim, you know, at a big public high school.
As you graduated high school, you went on to college?
I did.
And where did you meet your husband?
At college. I met him at Columbia International University. It's a small Bible college in South Carolina. And he has an opposite testimony of me. He had a wild, very, you know, American culture kind of upbringing, and he was just passionate about Jesus and the gospel. And I thought of that earlier when you were talking about how come the longer we know Jesus, it's like it becomes stale to us when it should do the opposite. That's what struck me about Clint, is having grown up in the church, I had less awe, I think, over how broken I really was, how desperately I needed Jesus. And he had so much awe over it. And it's been neat that just the way we've learned from one another from being so different.
How do you like Macon, Georgia?
I love it. I love it. Speaking of those roots, that I would love to put roots down here and never ever leave. I love it.
Yeah, there's a great Messianic synagogue there. Rabbi Greg Hirschberg is there in Macon, and very well known, and great community there at Beth Yeshua or Beth Messiah. I forget which one it is, but it's one of the Beths. You should certainly check it out. Macon's a great town. People don't really know a lot about Macon other than, who was it out of Macon? Jason, the Allman Brothers. All right, came out of Macon, Georgia. So that's one of their names. Didn't Little Richard come out of there too? Yeah, I'm not sure where he was from, but somewhere down that way. So tell us what you're doing now. Okay, your husband is a pastor of a church. You're now a pastor's wife. So you got nowhere away from the missionary field. Now your missionary field is right there in Macon, Georgia. How did that equip you to serve in the ministry?
I think it helped me not panic when ministry got hard, because I saw my mom and dad walk through hard ministry. Some of like those rose-colored glasses were maybe already gone. That's a blessing. I know I've said a lot of what's hard to be an MK, but it is such a blessing to be a missionary kid and a ministry or rabbi kid or pastor's kid. And I think one of the things that's a blessing is you get to see God, you get to see so much kingdom work as you watch your parents, and as you see their brokenness, you see God's grace through it. And I think, you know, my husband's the executive pastor, so he's not the lead. He more does the business side of the church. But we have been through many different experiences in ministry, some great, some not so great. And I think it's given me some resilience because I always have my mom and dad there to relate to me, having served for years in ministry. But also I realized Jesus is bigger. You know, it's not going to break you. He never wastes suffering. He's going to use it all for his glory and your good. So it's definitely helped me.
Well, it's an exciting story. I think it's very important that people understand that this is very real. As we look at mission work, the International Mission Board, we look at Campus Crusade for Christ, we look at what's going on in Africa, we look at what's going on in India, we look at what's going on in Guatemala, Haiti, so many countries around the world that we wonder about the people that fill those roles. I've never been called to that, but I've done outreaches in Ukraine, outreaches in Poland, Hungary, Israel, other countries that really kind of fit my particular focus of reaching the lost sheep of the house of Israel, Holocaust survivors. But it's very important that the people who are called to missions, those people who have mission work, have been in the mission field, understand what their kids go through, understand how to parent as they look at being an MK, a missionary kid, through your eyes and the contribution that they can make to you. What message do you have to the ones out there now that are looking at the mission field either for themselves or are watching this? Because we're watched in countries all over the world. Every Christian that wants to plug into the internet to see this on-demand Christian television show, we're not censored by the television networks, not censored by satellite, not censored by cable. In the countries where you have the Chaldean Christians in Iraq, where you have Christians in Saudi Arabia, you have Christians in Pakistan, Christians in Israel and the lost sheep of the house of Israel listening right now on Erev Shabbat, on the evening of the Sabbath, 8 hours time difference there, or kind of evening prime time in Israel. If they're not religious, they're watching. And there's a message for them as they embark on this either as a career or are looking at some of the struggles themselves, or they're thinking about going into this field as a young couple and they're going to raise their children born in this environment like your parents made that decision. What advice do you have for them?
I think one thing I would say is it's gonna be okay. I think there's a lot of fear going into it, especially when it involves your children. We've sat many times and thought, is God calling us overseas? And the first thing I think of is my 4 little girls, and what is this going to mean for them socially, emotionally, academically, everything. And I think I would want to say it's worth it to fulfill the Great Commission. If God is calling you to do it specifically overseas, then He will equip you. And it's not like God has this plan A for you and your kids are the stage prop that'll be drug along and He'll somehow make it for them. It is His plan A for them too. If He's called you, then this is the best thing that you could ever do for your kids. So much of who I am has come from seeing the world through my parents' work and from seeing more than just the world, the God who loves the world through their work. So He will redeem it. He will use it. I also think this is just a small piece of advice, but don't be afraid to be broken and real. Don't be afraid if your kid is hurting to tell somebody, so that I think there's also the fear of the stigma. Like, what kind of pastor or missionary or rabbi has a child who's rebelling or a child who's battling homosexuality or whatever it is? Reach out, because in that humility, that's how you help your kids. And I think that knowing, you go when God calls you, and when God calls you to come back, it's not more holy to share the gospel overseas than it is to come back to the U.S. or to your home country for a minute to regroup and get your kid counseling or do what you need to do to minister to them. So be led by the Spirit and trust Him, and don't be afraid to be human and broken. And Jesus is absolutely worth it, and He's gonna have a great plan for your kids too, not just you. I wouldn't change a thing about my story, even though I cried so many nights, because suffering is what makes us who we are. It's what gives us character. I can't even imagine who I would be if my whole life was just simple,
Amen. Words of wisdom from MK, missionary kid, now pastor's wife, who has stayed true to the faith, even through the ups and downs and the struggles, the questions. She teaches you and offers wisdom in this book, Owning the Gospel for Yourself, about feeling rootless, living in a fishbowl, sacrificing physical comforts, making friends and dating, dealing with loneliness, becoming missional out of your parents' shadow. Jeanne Harrison, author of Hiding in the Hallway, Anchoring Yourself as an MK. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. May God bless all the works of your hands.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it. And that brings to an end our live broadcast day, but that doesn't mean we go off the air. This segment and all other segments right here on Revealing the Truth will be rebroadcast on our station here www.inbn.com, as well as Facebook Live. Then you can catch our replays on WNDTV. We play 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, reaching over 70 nations around the world, over 450,000 social media followers, and the expanded network of our WNDTV partnership. We will be closing out the day as we enter into our Sabbath rest. But we encourage all of you to continue to follow us. Watch for upcoming shows. Go to ignitinganation.com and see the roster of guests. All next week we have a full calendar, including Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, a good friend of the program. He's got a new book out that is going to shake you to the core. He'll be with us Monday morning right here at the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network. Until we see you again back here at 9 a.m. Monday morning, Central Time, here in Birmingham, Alabama, we wish you Shabbat Shalom and a great week. Shavua Tov.